Hi.
Hi.
Favianna, I've been a fan of your work for a long time.
Thank you.
I am in the Fruitvale district a lot. The number of young women walking the streets is horrific. And I think isn't understood about it is what sex trafficking and human trafficking is about. So have you done much in that key issue that you see so much here in Oakland, in the Bay Area?
Well, first of all, sex trafficking is the largest grossing industry in the world. And I always want to be very careful because when I'm talking about pussy power, I am talking about the empowerment of women to have full agency over our decisions. And that includes the decision to be a sex worker or to not be a sex worker. And unfortunately, because of inequality, young women are forced into this kind of work. Now, inequality, I think, is at the bottom of it, which is that you do not have stable jobs in the United States. You have, in fact, very limited opportunities. You have a prison industrial complex that is putting people in a trap. And so young people really have no choice. I mean, even if they wanted to go to college and follow that route, right? Because the majority of students now, when they graduate college, they are being so inundated by debt. So the work that I do is about empowerment, is about looking at how we can eliminate patriarchy on all levels, and that includes the power dynamic that exists between the sex workers and why they're doing it. But at the same time, I think that we should not be against sex work, because all work is dignified work. And if people choose to engage in sex work, then we need to support their human rights, their workers' rights, their rights to organize. And I actually recently did a piece, the student at Duke University who was outed for being a porn star. And she was a very lucrative porn star, and she was also she was paying for her education at Duke. And they said, what are you doing? You're dirty. How could you even think of being a lawyer when you're doing this kind of work? And she said, well, actually, I actually think they're very aligned, because in the porn industry, I've learned how to advocate for what I want. And in my work as a women's rights lawyer, I'm going to also advocate for what I want. And interestingly, that you are coming down more on me for the choice that I make and how I want to be employed in an industry that's completely regulated. And you're not, you're using that as a way to slut shame me. And so she would get on these talk shows and debate. But all this to say that I think the conversation around sex, sexual freedom, sex work has a long way to go, and that definitely I've been exploring ways to get involved specifically in the trafficking aspect.
Thank you. I got a question for you, Favianna. How do some of us newly turned activists after your talk, how can we use our art to make change?
Well, I think you should start locally. One thing that I've been really exploring here with my friend Ashara is what's happening here in Oakland. So First Fridays, right? Who created First Fridays? It was artists. Artists organized, they saw beauty, and they saw power, and they saw the ability to create a very vibrant community. And that was many years ago, and artists brought a lot of, they introduced something called First Friday, and 10 years later, it's been actually more than a decade since this thing has blown up. Well, fast forward to market times, where now, we have big interests coming in, and restaurateurs, we have much larger corporations who are interested in a piece of Oakland, and they're organizing politically so that they can get a piece of the city. How about us as artists? Why aren't we organizing for cultural equity? Why aren't we organizing for this to be a special tax zone that can put money back into the arts? Because you know what? We are now getting pushed out. What's happening in San Francisco around artists not having a place to be, Brooklyn, New York, this is a national phenomenon. It's going to come here. And unless we begin to flex our political power as artists, as the creative community, and say, you know what, Oakland, invest in the arts. What's up with the arts and culture department that's suffering over here? You got 2 people working every single budget meeting you're threatening to cut, and yet who helped bring this about? Let's make a special tax zone. Let's put money back into school arts in the schools in Oakland. Let's have free arts programming, free concerts, because art is a human right and culture is a human right. And I think one of the things we can do, let's organize for arts equity. Let's begin locally and get some real power.
Amen.
Thank you.
We have time for one more. Anybody?
There's so many images of sexuality and women of color that are negative, and,
yes.
and we internalize that
Yep.
as young women. What would you say to a young woman that was kind of struggling with that? Like, she's seeing these images, Black or brown, she's seeing these images of how women of color are as sexual beings, and they're not accurate, and they're stereotypical.
Yeah. We're hypersexualized. Yes, the question is that how do we deal with young women of color who are inundated with hypersexual images of themselves? So this is a unique thing that we face as women of color, is that we're either completely asexualized or we're hypersexualized. And again, this is a binary. And the way that you break binaries is by introducing multi-dimensional narratives of who we really are. And that is that it's okay to be an empowered feminist that's fighting against police brutality, and that in the evening, you're organizing women of color circles around how to self-pleasure. Just really offering ourselves as multi-dimensional people. Because the thing is that when we begin to repress our sexuality side, which has happened, in the movement, even in the civil rights movement, we often didn't talk about the machismo that was happening in community organizing, or even the fact that sex was not something that was part of a liberation. But you know what the problem with that is, that then you have a culture, for example, Latinas have the highest rates of teenage pregnancy. And I think they're followed by young Black women, right? So by us not talking about sex, then we allow rape culture and having unprotected sex and not being able to negotiate to become the norm. And that's too much of a cost to pay. So I think that we need to have safe discussions in safe places where we say, okay, let's address the trauma that racism has inflicted on us and how it's impacted our relationship to sex. And let's begin to unpack that and now have positive representations, and at least let's talk. Let's have a conversation around what does my pussy look like? How can I know what I like? How do I explore that? So I do think that it's not that we stay away from it, but rather that we create safe spaces and we embrace our multidimensional stories in order to move away from the binaries. Thank you so much, and if you're creative people, which many of you are, I encourage you to push it, because creativity and representation, what we see is not enough. We really need to build political power to transform our reality. So thank you.
Thank you.